Hello and welcome to Further Inside Chor Leoni. My name is Eric Lights. I am the artistic director of Chor Leoni Men's Choir here in Vancouver, British Columbia. And joining me for a chat about what he does and his marvelous group does is Owain Park, who is from the extraordinary group, the Gesualdo Six. Hello, Owain. It's really nice to meet you.
Hi, Eric. So nice to be here. Really nice to see you.
Thank you for doing this. This is our second across the pond one in as many weeks, and so we're drinking coffee, and you may be onto something harder. So we'll see how how
Yeah.
that goes for our
Not
time
not
change
just
here.
yet. Don't worry. It's all right. I'm just yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, sometimes that's a better interview. You watch those old Dick Cavett shows. I don't know if you know what that is, but yeah, they Lord knows what they were on. Anyway, I want to ask you first a little bit about the genesis of the Gesualdo Six. How did this group come into being? Because especially a lot of folks in North America, I know you've done a Canadian tour, but a lot of folks in North America may not be as aware of you as maybe folks in your homeland.
Sure. Well, so we've been going now for just over 6 years. The group was founded in Cambridge, so this amazing city full of music, full of choirs, full of history, and lots of groups start out there. It's a perfect sort of breeding ground for enthusiastic young musicians to come together. One of the things that city has a lot of is big choirs, so talking 20, 30 people.
Right.
Big for a small city, if you like. One of the things you don't do so much of is singing like your own individual line just by yourself, And so that sort of single voice stuff is really how we came about, singing music by Gesualdo, who's an Italian composer from the Renaissance, music we hadn't sung before, with people we hadn't sung with before, but it just kind of sparked this real kind of vibrancy that we love working with each other, we love the repertoire, and we had the perfect sort of place to get going. So it was just a really nice melting pot for all those ideas.
For sure. Did you start as a student group? How did you know each other? Singing in the same choirs? Like how did the actual people get together on this one?
So it was a mixture of people that I knew well from maybe other singing sort of escapades when I was a bit younger, versus people that had just left the university, because the people who you're kind of studying with, sometimes if it's just all the same group of people, you don't have as much of a perspective on it. People have left. Some were in London, so Cambridge and London, we feel like it's miles apart. It's 60 miles. It's nothing. So and so it was nice to kind of have those sort of slightly different perspectives.
Worlds apart, but only a few miles.
Hey, look, I've been to Vancouver. When we planned the trip, we thought, yeah, it's just a short hop. No, it's not at all. So. It's great. I know it was pretty crazy, but
yeah, don't talk to anyone in North America about distances. It's
this
all
is what
about a different
you come
place.
to realize when you come over from our tiny island, even like traveling in Europe, when you can be in Paris in like an hour. It's just incredible.
Right.
Yeah, and so just to have a few different perspectives on it, the group has grown since then. We've got people from around the UK, but really, yeah, Cambridge with lots of people with sort of similar ideas but slightly different perspectives on it. So we knew how we wanted to work together, but it was still quite fresh and exciting.
Mm-hmm. And was the mandate? Well, let me ask: what was sort of the mandate? What was the mission? What was the thing that when anybody, I think, has the audacity to start a new group, they've got at least one or two ideas of what they think they want to be and what they want to do. That may evolve and change over time, but what was that initial impetus for you?
That's a really good point, and it's something we don't think about very often. I don't think about very often, but actually, I don't think that we had a sort of mission statement when we started, or we had a sort of idea of where we wanted to be. It just sort of happened. So we did this first concert of that music by Gesualdo, and it was really cool. We really enjoyed it. I've listened back to
was
that
it all
concert
was
since.
it all Gesualdo?
Yeah,
was it an
just,
all Gesualdo
yeah,
program?
so just Tenebrae sponsoring some Maundy Thursday, so about an hour's worth of music, give or take. Perfect length for a Cambridge summer's evening, whatever. And we had to put a name on the poster, so we put the Gesualdo Six down. I didn't really give it too much thought. It just sort of happened, and then we thought, oh, we enjoyed it. Let's do another concert. And then 100 gigs later, you're like, okay, right, no, we can really make this work.
Right. Yeah, that's. I was one of the founding members of the group Contus, and it's fun hearing your story. There are paths came out of a big singing school in St. Olaf, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm interested in is, unlike probably most places here in North America, the folks that you're working with are coming out of an enormous system of musical education, and especially of choral education. That is not, I don't think there's really an analogous situation here in North America. Can you describe, maybe it's best to just tell maybe your own story of like, how do you come up from being a young chorister to being in a one-on-a-part professional group? Like what that none of that happens overnight. How do you get to this? How do you get to this spot? What's the background of the singers that you're hiring and that you're working with?
Yeah. So I'd say the sort of choral scene, the choral journey that's available to us in the UK is pretty unique, and we're not shy of acknowledging that. Actually, we're very fortunate. So I started out as a chorister in Bristol, which is in the sort of the southwest of the country. This beautiful church called St Mary Redcliffe. Queen Elizabeth I said it was the goodliest and fairest parish church in all of England. So you've got this amazing architecture coupled with this amazing music, and like this huge organ, and you just get these sort of. It was nice because young choristers, like, nobody really knows what the music's about, who these people were, William Byrd, Thomas Tatter, who are they? We don't know why we're there, really. We just sort of turn up knowing that we might get paid some money for doing a wedding. And what the great thing is about that is,
some parent dropped you off, and you're like, well, I'm here, I might as well
exactly.
sing. Yeah.
Let's make it work, and we'll play some football afterwards, play some soccer, and it's just really cool to have that, and just to be so unaware that you're part of this amazing heritage. And you're really fortunate to be there. So I was there for 4 or 5 years in the choir there, and then taking that on elsewhere to become organ scholar at other churches around Bristol. Eventually ended up at Wells Cathedral, which is just this most beautiful, like, sort of fairly small kind of, but really poetic building. With these beautiful scissor arches, and lots of music was written for that building, over the last 500-600 years, and then ended up at Cambridge. So I sort of had all of these various different places that I took inspiration from along the way, and it's a similar story for a lot of the members of Gesualdo Six. Guy who's one of our countertenors, literally 20 miles up the road from me, was a chorister at his parish church. We didn't know each other, of course. But then actually me and Joseph, who's one of the tenors, we both found each other sort of on the organ scene when we were both kind of learning that way. So, we've all got these sort of cross paths, and actually Josh and Sam found out, Josh is a tenor, Sam's a bass, they found out they'd sung together without realising it when they were really small. They had no idea, but they'd actually done a concert together, and there's a photo to prove it or something. So, there's all of these young singers, and like, we're just a bit clueless, but ultimately it creates this amazing pool of singers from which to draw from. So as a conductor, in the UK, we're quite fortunate because there's lots of people who are doing a similar thing and doing it really well.
It seems to me, I run into a lot of maybe audience members and those sorts of things, and they look at a group like you or Voce Aid or any one of the myriad of amazing smaller English groups, and they're mystified, I think, by how that happens, and it's all of what you just said, that you spent your childhood cutting your teeth on Tallis, Byrd, etc., not even knowing what that tradition is, but that repertoire, not only, my guess is, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts on this, that repertoire sort of informs you as a growing and developing human being, but also the pieces, the music themselves requires certain vocal and musical skills that you need to do, that every couple, you have to do a service every however many days, and the sight reading and all the musicianship. Would you agree with that, so that these roots have to be quite strong in order for there to be sort of the flowerings of these small ensembles?
Yeah, it's a really nice way of putting it, actually. It is a little bit like that sort of growth of a plant, and you need to just keep it fed and watered, and that's what we're struggling with actually at the moment in this country, is kind of some people not quite acknowledging the fact that we do actually have this amazing tradition. It should be preserved, and it should be not just preserved and kind of put behind glass and kind of shown this is what it's like, actually encouraged and allowed to grow further. And so yeah, it is very much like Talis and Bird is very much part of our DNA, and also it's it's music that was written here as well, so it's a living history as well, continuing that tradition,
Right.
And also something that we as a group love to build on, not just for music from this country, but actually from Europe as well, and ultimately around the world. But we know that sort of medieval Renaissance tradition was really strong in this area, so. It's just we're just lucky to be able to just look at those cross currents and see how these composers interacted and keep bringing them to life, and sharing that with audiences is so exciting, and something we've missed, especially over the last 12 months.
Well, indeed. And I was going to ask you. You brought up something I was going to ask you is. What is your take on the state of the cathedral choristers or the church choristers, and that whole tradition of education, and is it in jeopardy? Certainly, COVID's put a lot of what we're all doing into at least a pause, but I know that there's a lot of other cultural aspects going on at the same time. Where do you see this all happen? Or how do you see this happening in your country?
It's tricky because what's interesting as a traveling musician is you see how different cultures interact with their music. So you see, for instance, this is a very broad generalization, but Germany, we look at them and think, wow, don't they plow a huge amount of money into the arts from the state? Don't they really support their orchestras and their musicians? Right. In the US, we think, wow, aren't they? They're these generous patrons and benefactors who really sort of support the musicians on an individual basis. And then here, we're kind of going, oh, can we just scrabble around for a little bit of money? And of course, it's not quite like that, but especially with what I was.
Well, the grass is always greener, right?
Well, you could say that. But
I
think one of the things we do have here, as I've touched on, is that cathedral parish tradition. Those buildings come with their own costs. These are ancient structures that require a lot of maintenance and money to preserve, and so the cathedral, for instance, the chapter, sort of the board of people who are sort of looking after these buildings, they're stretched constantly between, do we repair this area of the roof, or can we employ 3 choral scholars? And and those conversations are happening more and more frequently, I believe, and so it's I'd say it's not desperate, but it is it's more challenging, and certainly the pandemic hasn't helped.
Do you see another way happening for that kind of education and that kind of tradition to be kept up if the churches have troubles?
Yeah, well, we saw in kind of from like maybe the 1960s through to the 1990s, there was the choirs were just decimated. So parish choirs, with young boys and girls singing their top lines, is what's really interesting traveling around the UK. They've all got photos. There's this thing called the Royal School of Church Music. Quite a niche organisation, but they have all of these photos up, and when the member choirs were there, and you see in the 1920s you've got like 30 kids in the middle of nowhere in this parish church, and it's absolutely fantastic. And then as you go through it, the numbers drop off, and then gradually you're left with a group of fairly elderly adults, some of whom were still singing in the 1920s and have been going for 70 years. You see what I mean? So it's as if we didn't keep renewing that tradition and keep getting people interested. As children maybe become more interested with sport, or there are more opportunities to do other things over the weekend. Singing in church maybe just became less attractive, less of an option. So there are strongholds still left, and there are some amazing choirs here, but they're just fewer.
Right. What's interesting to me, and I've talked to a number of people around the world about this, and they kind of all say, or they have similar concerns maybe, that choral singing used to be this kind of pyramid, that you'd have a broader base of people doing it at maybe the amateur level and whatever else, and it would sort of get up to, and like professional choirs, like that was, maybe in the church you'd get paid to be a singer in a church choir in England, but not the same way that Gesualdo Six exists. And at least what I'm seeing is that kind of instead of this, we're moving towards this. There's now this like explosion of chamber vocal ensembles, both in quantity and frankly, I think in quality, that I don't think was even there when I started Cantus in the 90s. And I'm like wondering where are these people coming from, and why do they all think they need to start a professional group? I mean, how do you see Gesualdo Six fitting into the flora and fauna of the professional world, both in your country, and let's face it, it's a worldwide gig right now?
Yeah, it is, and especially since so much more has happened online. I mean, I like to think that we started with a sort of the view to make sure that we did have a strong, active presence online, but everyone's been forced into it over the last year in a big way.
Well,
so that's really
kicking and screaming, maybe.
Yeah, quite. I don't know whether that. I think you're probably right about that sort of the sort of pyramid turning into this kind of weird shape at the top.
Yeah,
and that's kind of once that's interesting, because of course that means that there's a huge amount of material for amateurs and professionals to choose from in terms of what they listen to, who they look up to, who they're inspired by, what their programming is. But actually, the sort of feeder singers, as you say, that broad base, if it narrows too far, you just end up, ultimately, that professional, it will shrink again, and then you'll be left with a really very thin strip of niche choral singers. And so we don't really want that. And so a big drive at the moment is really this education, getting children especially interested in singing and using their voice well.
And for a few of them, they'll find that spark, that this is the spark in their life, and then they move on into moving
exactly.
to places,
and it doesn't have to be
such
everyone, but you kind of want to present everyone with the opportunity and let them decide. Go to them and then let them come to you. But if you don't go to them, then they just won't come, because singing is still perceived as this like slightly uncool thing for some age groups, and I think it's that sort of diversification as well of, singing can be for everyone. Everyone's got a voice. Let's hear it. I think that's really important.
Yeah. I want to turn to how you all work as an ensemble. What's the process of music selection, music rehearsal, managing the group? I mean, I think we see a YouTube clip and we think, oh, great, they sang Secret Chervus really well. Awesome. But there's so much. I mean, calling it the tip of the iceberg is probably being unfair to icebergs. Like, how does the rest of what you do as a band, how does that work for you? What's your process?
I think one day, and I know you could, like any group, you could make a documentary on it, and I think the people who go to the concerts would just be amazed about like how many different things go into the production of, as you say, a video that you see online, for example. It's not just turning up and singing it and go, there's so much more to it, especially when it's a small group and you're kind of, you're all knitted into that framework. And like, I think the simplest time for us was that first concert, because we rehearsed it, stuck our name on the poster, and then did the gig. Some people came.
Whoever came.
Yeah, and that was that. Yeah. Whereas now, like, there's just this whole sort of process, and so kind of my main role, I suppose, is just kind of overseeing what we're doing and looking at where the opportunities are for interesting programming, where we can commission new pieces, how that fits into our sort of existing programs, so that people, so that we're not just. I like the idea that we're reinventing all the time, but I think if you're just constantly churning out new stuff, sometimes it's hard to find a narrative. So we try and build in, give people a little bit of what they're used to, and then challenge their perceptions a bit. So whether that be in a concert, their piece they've heard before next to a piece they're like, whoa, what is this? It's quite cool to do that. So that's one thing, and then basically just also people management, making sure everyone's happy. Especially at the moment, making sure that everyone's.
Well, that's a full-time job.
That's a full-time job. That's why it's small groups, though, because if it's any bigger, then you need an army of people to look after them. So, it's just interesting, isn't it? Just all these personalities and the sort of blending of people, not just as musicians, but also as colleagues and friends. In a small group, that's so much a part of it, especially when you're touring. Like our Canada tour when we came in 2018 was just such a highlight, because obviously we're all good friends. Most of us have been to Canada with various other groups, so we kind of knew what to expect, but we're really excited to take our stuff for the first time. Performing pieces by Canadian composers was really cool, because you can see people's faces light up, and then putting that alongside music that we do day in, day out from this country, it was just a really happy marriage of all those different things. And so that's, as I said, that's something we've really missed over the past year or so, and we're just looking forward, when the time's right, to putting that back into our schedule.
What I know, looking to the future is, I think we're all just sort of looking to the future. There's not as much of as interesting a present as we normally have as musicians.
Yeah.
What are the hopes? Are there projects, initiatives, things on the horizon that you and the group want to achieve or do or explore?
Yeah, I mean, the list goes on, but I suppose that what we're looking at the moment is the big Josquin anniversary this year, 500 years since he died. So we're kind of looking at him as a composer, this sort of father figure of the Renaissance, and then looking at putting him in context. So I know a lot of groups are doing Josquin. We're trying to do a bit of like stuff before, stuff after, and then we can build that into our programming, not just for this year, but also next year and beyond, because this year has already been disrupted. We're not going to get out there doing concerts to people for a while in the same way. So we're going to have to think further ahead. So in some ways that's nice, because then we don't have to kind of keep, this sort of tiny cycle of programming. It can actually just be a little bit more long term. Obviously recordings are such a big part of what we do. We love making CDs. We want them to be as good as possible, because we want to be proud of that stuff, because ultimately that's kind of how we first listen to groups that we admire. Their recordings.
Right.
It's really where they put
you get a
their
Talent
stamp on.
Scholar CD and you're like, oh yeah.
and you just know it's them, and you want to listen to it again.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think the biggest compliment anyone can ever say about a CD is, once I got to the end of it, I just played it again. I let it spin on, and I think that's so cool. So that's one thing, and then really just sort of see what we can do to push the envelope of this online stuff, because like the point and shoot recordings that we do, I mean, they're really important. We can make them really high quality, but other people and us, we're sort of doing it. Is it reinvented? We can do a little bit more, I think. So we're going to find some interesting ways for audio and visual to just be a little bit different, to hopefully become more immersive for people, so that they feel like they want to go back to the screen to watch us, rather than feel as though that's the only way they can consume the media at the moment. So yeah, just a few little things to think about.
Well, I really want to thank you for speaking with me and giving me and all of us some background on how you work and how you operate and your thoughts on things. I wish you really all the best and thank you.
Real pleasure, and I hope we get to connect when we're across the pond.
I hope so too, sooner than later.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Cheers, Eric. Thank you.